She hadn't even spoken her first full sentence when the sound cracked through the courtroom like thunder. The officer's hand met her face, and in that instant, the silence in the room was louder than any gavel strike could ever be. People froze. Pens stopped moving. A journalist in the back gasped but quickly covered her mouth. And Danielle Carter. She didn't move, not a tear, not a sound, just her eyes, steady, locked forward, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The courtroom wasn't supposed to feel like this. A place of law, a place of order, a place where words were meant to carry more weight than fists. But in that single moment, the balance shifted. Every person sitting there knew something irreversible had just begun. The judge's gavel slipped from his hand. He bent slowly to pick it up, but his eyes lingered too long on Danielle, longer than they should have. And when he rose, there was something in his face, something no one could explain, that made the whispers in the gallery grow louder. The slap was just the beginning. What came after would shake Chicago's courthouse to its very foundation. But here's the question. Why did Judge Harold Whitman freeze in that moment? Why did a man known for being cold, detached, and merciless stare at Danielle as if she wasn't just another defendant, but someone who carried the key to his own undoing? And why, seconds after an officer humiliated her before the entire court, would Danielle Carter, a young black woman no one thought would matter beyond the day's docket, walk out with something no one expected? His heart? This wasn't a case. This was a reckoning, and every second you'll hear from this point on will force you to wonder, if you were in that courtroom, would you have stood, would you have stayed silent, or would you have acted? Before we go further, pause and think about this moment. If you saw a woman slapped in open court, with cameras rolling and justice hanging in the air, would you speak out? Or would fear silence you like it did so many others that day? Tell me in the comments right now what you would have done, because the story you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about justice. And if you're ready to uncover every secret, every betrayal, and every twist that followed, make sure you subscribe and stay with me till the end. Because trust me, you won't forget how this ends. The room was a cathedral of silence. 100 eyes flicked from Danielle's still face to the red mark blooming across her cheek. It was as if time itself hesitated, unsure whether to move forward or hold its breath. No one dared to look at the officer. No one dared to look at the judge, but everyone looked at her. Danielle Carter, a woman most of them had never heard of before today, a name that wouldn't have made it past the courthouse doors if not for a charge so small it could have been dismissed with the stroke of a pen. But here she was, center stage in a city that had forgotten her father, a city that had already written her story before she walked in. And yet, she wasn't trembling. She wasn't begging. She wasn't broken. She stood like stone, with only one hand gripping something the rest of them had overlooked, a folded envelope, worn from years of touch, pressed so tightly it seemed part of her skin. That envelope would come to mean more than anyone in that courtroom could imagine. But in this moment, it was invisible to them. All they saw was a woman struck down by authority, and a judge staring at her as if she had walked out of his own past. The officer's chest rose with arrogance, satisfied with the silence he had created. The bailiff shifted uneasily, knowing the cameras were watching. Reporters scribbled furiously, not yet sure if this was a story about disrespect in the court or the unraveling of something far greater. The judge's knuckles whitened against the bench. His hand hovered over the gavel but didn't strike. He should have demanded order. He should have called the officer out. He should have silenced the whispers. But he didn't. Instead, his eyes betrayed him. He looked not at the officer, not at the gallery, not even at the lawyers waiting to see his reaction. He looked only at Danielle, and in that stare was recognition, and fear. It was brief, so brief that most people missed it, but not everyone. A man in the second row leaned forward. Marcus Greene, polished suit, polished smile, the defense attorney representing the officers. His eyes flicked between Danielle and the judge, and a smirk spread across his lips. He saw it. He saw something that didn't belong in that courtroom, and he was going to use it. Danielle's breath was steady, but inside her chest a storm had gathered. Not rage, not despair. Something colder, something patient. Because Danielle knew something no one else in that room did. That slap wasn't the beginning of her humiliation. It was the beginning of their exposure. The cameras caught the sound, the shock, the frozen faces of the gallery. But what they didn't capture, what no lens could record, was the history standing invisible between Danielle Carter and Judge Harold Whitman. A history written decades before this moment, tied to her father's blood, tied to secrets buried in the very foundation of Chicago's courts. And in her hand, pressed to her side, was the key. That envelope. But here's the question. Why had she brought it here, of all places? Why carry it into the lion's den, knowing the wolves circled in every corner? And why? Why did the judge look at it like it carried his own name? The gavel finally struck, breaking the paralysis in the room. But the damage was already done. Everyone had felt it. The shift. The sense that this trial wasn't going to be ordinary. The courtroom had witnessed a slap. But what they didn't realize was that they had also witnessed the spark. And from sparks, flames spread quickly. By the time the judge cleared his throat to speak, the story had already left the four walls of that chamber. Phones buzzed in reporters' pockets. Whispers became text messages. And before the hour was over, Chicago would be murmuring about the young woman who stood unshaken in the face of power. But the city didn't know yet. The courtroom didn't know yet. Even the judge didn't know yet that Danielle Carter had not come to court just to face her charge. She had come to court to face him. If you were in that gallery, if you were one of those people watching a woman struck in open court, would you have stood up and demanded justice? Or would you have kept your head down, hoping the storm would pass? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because as this story unfolds, you're going to realize just how dangerous silence can be. And if you think this is intense, stay with me. Because what Danielle Carter carried in her hand will not just shake a courtroom, it will rip apart a judge's soul. The courtroom felt smaller now, the air heavier. Every step Danielle took, every subtle shift of her shoulders seemed magnified. People weren't just watching, they were measuring her, judging her, wondering if this woman, so calm, so controlled after a public slap, was human at all. And yet, she was human, entirely human. Inside her chest, her heart beat not with fear, but with calculation. She remembered her father's words, repeated over and over since childhood. Justice isn't about what they see. It's about what they cannot. It was a lesson Danielle had learned early, one that had shaped her entire life. Every glance she cast, every movement was a test. And right now, the test wasn't about survival. It was about choice. The officers remained statues of authority, their confidence only slightly shaken by the whisper of cameras and scribbled notes in the gallery. The judge's gaze, however, remained fixed. He was calm on the surface, but beneath that calm was an unease he hadn't felt in years. He had seen many defendants in his career. He had presided over countless trials, countless arguments, countless disputes. But he had never seen one like Danielle Carter. Not quite like this, not quite holding the weight of history in her hands. And history had a way of catching up. Her eyes scanned the courtroom subtly. She noticed the bailiff's slight nod of sympathy, the way the stenographer paused mid-stroke, almost as if she wanted to intervene but couldn't. Every movement in the room told a story, stories of people trapped between obligation and conscience. And Danielle? She was rewriting the story without saying a word. She slid the envelope slightly, testing the air. A crease caught the corner of a beam of sunlight. The judge's eyes flicked, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but Danielle saw it. The smallest reaction meant everything. Somewhere in the back, Marcus Greene shifted in his chair. He thought he understood her, thought he could predict her, thought he could control her with the legacy of betrayal he carried. But he hadn't counted on this. She was far smarter than she looked, far more patient. And patience, in moments like this, could be the deadliest weapon. Time slowed. Each heartbeat echoed in Danielle's ears. Every sound in the courtroom, the shuffle of papers, the faint tap of heels on marble, the soft hum of a camera lens, was amplified. The energy in the room had shifted, though no one could quite place why. The officer who had struck her shifted uneasily, his hand brushing against his holster. Confidence is fragile. And it cracks, Danielle thought, when you least expect it. A single tiny detail caught her eye. The judge's ring. A simple gold band, unremarkable, yet it gleamed in a way that made her pause. There was history there, secrets there, something she could use if the moment was right, and the moment would come. The courtroom didn't know it yet. The city didn't know it yet. But Danielle Carter had arrived in this place carrying more than just herself. She had arrived carrying truth, history, a reckoning. And when the gavel finally fell again, it did not bring order. It brought expectation, the kind of expectation that makes every person in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats, because in that moment no one could deny it. Something had changed. Something had begun. And for the first time, every eye in that courtroom, including Judge Harold Whitman's, was on Danielle Carter. Not as a defendant, not as a mere participant in the day's proceedings, but as a force, a question, a storm waiting to be unleashed. The courtroom had begun to settle, or at least it appeared to. Whispers softened, pens scratched again, and cameras clicked, but the air itself had changed. It wasn't just Danielle who felt it. Everyone in that chamber felt it, whether they realized it or not. The judge straightened in his seat, a man who had spent decades mastering authority, yet his knuckles remained white against the polished wood. He glanced at Danielle again. She had shifted slightly, her hand brushing the envelope at her side, and something in his eyes flickered. Recognition, or perhaps fear. The gallery had started to murmur, but the words seemed hollow. They didn't yet understand what was happening. They couldn't, not yet. And then there were the eyes, so many eyes, all layered on her. The young clerk, typing frantically, stole glances over her shoulder, unsure whether to record or intervene. The bailiff, standing silently, felt the weight of the moment press down on her shoulders. The spectators in the front row shifted in discomfort, sensing the tension that wasn't spoken aloud. Danielle noticed them all. She didn't just feel the eyes, she measured them, understood them. Every flicker of doubt, every second of hesitation, every hidden thought that passed like a shadow across a face. Even Marcus Greene's gaze burned into her. There was calculation there, the kind of calculation that could ruin a life if applied with precision. But Danielle had learned that patience often outweighs even the sharpest intelligence. She could see it all, and she was waiting. She waited for the smallest crack. The judge's hand hovered near his gavel, his lips pressed together, but his mind was elsewhere. He wasn't just listening to the officers, the prosecution, or the gallery. He was listening to something older, something he had tried to forget, something buried deep in the past that had now been unearthed by a woman who had no business standing in front of him like this. And yet here she was. Danielle shifted her weight, just slightly, enough to reveal the corner of the envelope that had already begun to draw attention, not to the world, but to him. A twitch in his eye betrayed the memory, a recognition of a handwriting he had thought lost to time. The courtroom continued, or tried to, as if life could resume its ordinary course. But nothing could. Not now. Not ever. She felt the whispers in the gallery brush against her like a current, and she understood something vital. The room was a living thing, reacting to her, responding to her presence, watching, waiting, breathing. She let herself imagine what they were thinking, that she was broken, that she was frightened, that she was powerless. Let them think it. every second Danielle stayed still, calm, calculating, was a strike against the expectation that authority always wins. Every blink, every slight tilt of her chin, every breath she drew, added weight to a story that was only beginning to unfold. The officers were unaware. Marcus was unaware. Even the judge, with all his years of control, didn't yet grasp the depth of the storm that had just arrived in his courtroom. A single thought echoed in Danielle's mind. They have no idea what's coming. And soon, they will see everything. And somewhere in the back of the room, unseen, unnoticed, a reporter adjusted her lens. The shutter clicked. The first image of Danielle's calm defiance after the slap would make its way across social media by the end of the day. The first ripple of the wave that would sweep through Chicago. The first hint that this was not a routine trial, not a routine moment, not a routine woman standing in the face of injustice. And the judge, finally, cleared his throat, trying to reclaim control, trying to remind everyone that order still existed. But the room had already shifted, the balance had already changed, and Danielle Carter had already begun to turn the scales. The hum of the courtroom felt distant now, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Danielle's mind drifted, not to the glares of the officers, not to the whispers of the gallery, but to a time long before this room existed. Atlanta, years ago, a summer that smelled of heat, dust, and the distant rumble of protest chants. A younger Danielle, barely a teenager, clutching her father's hand as he led her through streets lined with banners and signs. Her father, Jonathan Carter, was not a man who could be ignored. He had fire in his voice, conviction in his eyes, and a belief in justice so fierce that it had drawn enemies from every corner. She remembered the day he disappeared, an ordinary protest turned extraordinary nightmare. She had watched uniforms approach, calm faces hiding intent, and then felt the crushing weight of helplessness as he was taken away, never to be seen again. And now, decades later, she was standing in a different courtroom, facing echoes of the same injustice. Only this time, she held something tangible, something that could turn the scales that had long been tilted against her family. Marcus Greene sat in the back row, his suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. But Danielle saw him differently now. This was the man who had defended the very officers who had perpetuated her father's nightmare. This was the man who had once whispered promises of protection to her family, and then broken them when opportunity called. He thought he had power here, but Danielle knew something he could never anticipate. Patience is more potent than privilege, and memory is sharper than any law book. The gallery murmured again, snapping Danielle's attention back to the present, but her gaze lingered on the judge. Harold Whitman, the man who presided with authority over hundreds of cases, suddenly seemed smaller, haunted. Because in that envelope, hidden at Danielle's side, was evidence he had hoped would remain buried forever. Evidence tied to his own family. Evidence that, once revealed, would reshape not just this courtroom, but every decision he had ever made. Danielle shifted slightly, allowing her eyes to sweep over every detail of the room. The bailiff's hesitant posture, the stenographer's trembling fingers, Marcus's subtle smirk. All of them were pieces of a puzzle she had been assembling her entire life. Every injustice her father suffered, every lie whispered into the shadows, every moment she had been told to stay in her place, was now a thread woven into her plan. And now the threads were beginning to tangle, because the envelope contained names, dates, proof, and it was all connected to the man sitting at the bench, the judge. For the first time, she realized the truth of her father's warnings. Power protects itself, but only until it underestimates the person it seeks to control. A hush fell over the room as the judge cleared his throat, attempting to command attention. But Danielle's thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered a phrase her father had repeated endlessly. Justice isn't given, It's earned, fought for, and sometimes stolen. And in that instant, Danielle understood something crucial. She wasn't here to beg for justice. She was here to take it. The gallery leaned forward in anticipation, unaware that the first thread of revelation had already been tugged, the first crack in a facade that had long seemed impenetrable. Marcus Greene's eyes narrowed, sensing a shift but not yet understanding its source. The judge's hands twitched subtly, betraying the unease he could not yet voice. And Danielle? She remained composed, the calm before a storm that no one in that courtroom would see coming. Because history, long buried, was about to collide with the present, and when it did, everyone would have to reckon with truths they had hoped were forgotten. The room had settled, or so it appeared, but Danielle could feel the current shifting beneath the surface, a tension that wasn't spoken, yet was impossible to ignore. The officers, still smarting from the slap that had shocked the gallery, straightened, chests puffed, trying to reassert control. Their presence was meant to intimidate, to remind everyone who held the power, and for a moment, it worked. The gallery shifted uneasily, journalists paused mid-sentence, and even the bailiff's hands tightened at her sides. Marcus Greene's smirk returned, sharper now, full of confidence. He believed the trial, like every other, was his to command. He believed that Danielle, regardless of her courage, would be nothing more than a footnote. But he hadn't counted on the patience she carried. He hadn't counted on the strategy etched into every line of her stance, every measured breath, every silent glance. Danielle's eyes swept the courtroom, noting the cracks in their confidence. The officer who had struck her earlier shifted nervously, glancing at Marcus as if seeking approval. The judge, still glancing at Danielle, hid his unease behind a calm mask, but Danielle saw it. Small tremors, tiny hesitations, subtle shifts in posture that revealed control was slipping from their hands, and she knew, instinctively, that patience washer weapon. The officer barked an order, sharp and commanding, expecting compliance. The gallery flinched. Marcus adjusted his tie, smug satisfaction etched on his face, but Danielle remained unmoved. She didn't flinch, she didn't lower her gaze, she didn't retreat. It was the first strike, the first subtle reversal in a game they thought they controlled. Time stretched, and every heartbeat was amplified. Danielle could hear her own thoughts, like whispered mantras in the tension-filled room. Patience. Watch. Wait. Observe. Timing is everything. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to restore decorum. He barked at the officers to stand down, but his words carried a tension he could not hide. Because in his heart, he knew that Danielle's calm was a signal, a warning. The audience shifted uneasily. Every spectator, every clerk, every attorney felt it, even if they didn't understand it yet. The power they assumed was absolute had already begun to waver. Danielle allowed a small, nearly imperceptible movement of her hand, brushing the edge of the envelope. No one in the room noticed, except for the judge. His eyes flicked down, hesitation passing across his face. A memory stirred. Recognition. The first crack in his armor. Marcus Greene caught it too, and his eyes narrowed in calculation. He realized, just for a moment, that control was slipping, though he couldn't yet identify why. The courtroom, which had seemed so predictable moments ago, had shifted. Authority was still present, but Danielle held something intangible, something invisible to most, yet potent in its effect. A quiet strength, a patient defiance, a calm determination that could unbalance even the most confident of men, and Danielle knew, as she stared forward, that the moment to act was approaching. The officers continued their attempt to assert dominance, but every command was met with silence, every order with patience, every intimidation with composure. The first power reversal was subtle, almost invisible, but it had begun. And in that courtroom, as whispers echoed and cameras continued to click, one truth became undeniable. Danielle Carter had shifted the balance. The game was no longer theirs to control. The courtroom's rhythm had shifted. Orders were barked, pens scratched, cameras clicked. But beneath it all, a quiet tension thrummed like a low drumbeat, vibrating through the polished floors and high ceilings. And there it was, the envelope. Small, worn at the edges, pressed subtly into Danielle's hand. To the untrained eye, it was nothing, just a folded piece of paper, easily overlooked. To Danielle, it was everything. For years it had been tucked away, hidden, forgotten by everyone but her. Its contents were dangerous, undeniable, and powerful. Evidence of betrayal, of secrets buried deep beneath layers of law, authority, and family pride. Names, dates, proof of connections that could shatter careers, reputations, and even lives. And now, here it was, resting quietly in her lap, waiting for the right moment to speak. She shifted slightly, brushing the corner against the polished wood of the bench. A shadow flickered across the judge's face, barely noticeable, a twitch of recognition in his eyes. He saw it. He couldn't not see it. Something in that envelope carried a history he had hoped would remain buried. The gallery, the officers, Marcus Greene, they remained oblivious. They were all too confident in their control, too certain of their authority, too invested in the roles they had rehearsed for decades. But Danielle understood one simple truth. Authority is fragile. Confidence is a mask. Power is only as solid as the fear it inspires. Her hand hovered slightly over the envelope. A pause, a breath. And in that stillness, the courtroom seemed to lean forward, anticipating, waiting, sensing that something was about to change. Marcus shifted in his seat, following her movements like a predator watching prey. But he could not see her plan. He could not predict the precision with which she had orchestrated this moment. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim the courtroom, attempting to assert control. But his gaze kept flicking to the envelope. Memories long buried pressed at the corners of his mind. His brother, old cases, promises unkept. A family secret, decades old, now lying in the hands of a woman he had barely noticed until this moment. Danielle felt the weight of the room, of the city outside, of the history she carried in her hand. And she knew the time was coming to make a choice. She could stay silent, and the envelope would remain unnoticed. She could act, and unleash a truth that would rip through the courtroom like lightning through glass. And she made her choice. Just slightly, almost imperceptibly, the envelope slipped from her grip, sliding across the polished bench. A sound too quiet for anyone but the judge to notice. A sound that would change everything. His eyes widened. Recognition, shock, fear, guilt. He bent slightly to pick it up, hands trembling, hidden from the world, yet betraying the storm inside. The first thread of history had been pulled, and now the unraveling had begun. Marcus Greene noticed the shift too. A small frown crossed his face. He sensed control slipping but could not yet place why. The gallery remained unaware, caught in the illusion of order. But Danielle? She watched, patient, composed, ready. Because this was the moment she had prepared for her entire life. And in the judge's hand, the envelope would reveal more than names. It would reveal truths, betrayals, connections that could no longer be ignored. The courtroom was on the brink. The first major twist had been set into motion, and no one yet realized the storm that was coming. Imagine holding a secret that could change everything around you. Would you act immediately, or wait for the perfect moment? Comment below what you would do if you were Danielle. Would you expose it now, or wait to see how the pieces fell? And remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because from this moment, the story begins to unravel, and the first twist is about to reshape every life in that courtroom. The envelope had shifted the air in the courtroom. Not a sound was needed to declare it. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed to hesitate, as though the room itself recognized the weight of what had just been revealed. Judge Harold Whitman held the envelope in his hand, trembling slightly, a storm of emotion threatening to breach his calm exterior. He had faced countless trials, seen every form of deceit imaginable, and yet this was different. This was personal. Danielle watched him carefully, every twitch of his hand, every subtle tightening of his jaw, every hesitation in his eyes. She didn't need words. His silence was loud enough, and it told her everything she needed to know. The first thread of power had shifted. Marcus Greene, sensing the disruption, leaned forward. He tried to regain control, offering legal jargon and rehearsed threats, but Danielle didn't flinch. The officers, too, were uncertain. Their authority, previously unchallenged, had been pierced by something they couldn't touch or silence. And for the first time in decades, Judge Whitman wasn't fully in command. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand. Danielle noticed, and a quiet satisfaction curled in her chest. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. The first real fracture in a system that had always seemed untouchable. Whispers rose in the gallery, journalists scribbling notes furiously, yet none could see what Danielle saw, the look in the judge's eyes, the moment when history collided with the present. He wasn't just judging the case anymore. He was confronting the ghosts of his own past, the secrets he had buried, the promises he had broken. Danielle's mind raced through the possibilities. The envelope contained evidence that could topple reputations, reveal betrayals, and undo decades of carefully hidden truths. And she had the power to decide when or if it would be revealed. A small smile touched Marcus Greene's lips. He thought he understood the tension, believed he could manipulate it. But Danielle had anticipated him. Every smirk, every whisper, every calculated move had already been considered. He was a player in her plan, not the architect. The judge's voice finally broke the silence, firm yet faltering. "Ms. Carter," he began, but the words faltered, as if he were speaking to someone far larger than the room, someone capable of unearthing everything he had tried to hide. The officers shifted, uneasy. Marcus adjusted his suit, trying to restore dominance, but the courtroom had already shifted. The invisible balance had tipped. Danielle felt it. Patience, control, and timing, the three weapons she had honed over years, were now in play, and the first confrontation had been won, silently, without a single word spoken. But this was only the beginning, because once history collides with the present, there is no going back, and Danielle Carter was just getting started. The courtroom had quieted, but the storm beneath the surface had only intensified. Everyone else thought the trial was proceeding as normal. But Danielle Carter knew the truth. Nothing about this day was ordinary, and no one here was prepared for what was about to unfold. Judge Harold Whitman sat back in his chair, the envelope pressed lightly against his palm. His fingers flexed, his mind racing, yet his expression betrayed nothing, or at least nothing he wanted anyone else to see. Danielle rose slowly. She walked toward the bench with measured steps, each one a silent declaration. No one in the gallery stirred, no officer moved. Even Marcus Greene, confident moments before, froze mid-note, sensing the shift in the room's energy. When she reached the bench, she stopped just short of the judge. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching, carrying the weight of history, patience, and intent. The first words were unspoken. It was a silent exchange. Her presence alone conveyed a challenge, a question, a reckoning. The judge swallowed, the envelope clutched tightly. He opened it slowly, as if every fold, every crease, held a secret that could undo him. And it did. Inside were letters, photographs, and documents, proof of betrayal that went beyond the courthouse walls, beyond the city, into the heart of his own family. The words and images were damning, undeniable, and personal. For a heartbeat, the judge faltered. He could see it, feel it, and yet he couldn't escape it. The past had returned, not as a memory, but as a weapon. Danielle's calm, poised face remained unreadable. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every detail of her presence, The tilt of her chin, the patience in her eyes, the subtle hint of expectation was enough to turn power upside down. The first twist hit. The judge wasn't simply presiding over her case. He was now at the mercy of the very history he had buried, held in the hands of a woman he had underestimated for far too long. And in that moment, Danielle realized something vital. Authority, no matter how long it has stood, is never unassailable. Not when patience, courage, and truth collide. The envelope had changed everything. It had exposed the hidden cracks. It had shifted control. It had forced the first reckoning. The courtroom remained unaware of the private collision that had occurred at the bench. They thought the trial was proceeding normally. They were wrong. Marcus Greene watched silently, sensing disruption, but unable to act. The officers shifted nervously, authority slipping further from their grasp. And the judge? The judge knew his decisions, his control, even his reputation, were now fragile. Danielle stepped back slightly, her eyes still locked on his. The first power reversal was complete, silent, and devastating. And she had not even spoken a single word, because sometimes the most dangerous words are the ones left unspoken. The courtroom was alive with expectation, though no one yet understood why. Whispers rose like wind through the rafters, pens paused mid-scribble, and cameras focused on Danielle, unaware that the storm was about to break. Judge Harold Whitman gripped the envelope, the dam of his composure beginning to fracture. The contents were no longer just paper. They were a verdict in themselves, a revelation too long suppressed. And now, as Danielle allowed the envelope to slip slightly from beneath her hand, the first shockwaves rippled outward. A clerk, innocently glancing at the envelope, caught sight of its contents spilling just enough for a corner to peek out. It was small, subtle, but enough. Enough to spark curiosity, enough to awaken suspicion. And then the judge, flustered, glanced at the gallery. A pause, a subtle tremor in his hand. He knew he had to regain control, or at least appear to, but the moment had already slipped from his grasp. Marcus Greene's eyes narrowed, sensing the disruption but not yet seeing its source. He rose, adjusting his tie, voice rehearsed and commanding, ready to assert authority. But the courtroom had shifted in ways even he could not command. Danielle, calm and poised, allowed a quiet smile to tug at the corners of her lips. The first wave of her plan had unfolded. The first domino had fallen. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Cameras clicked. Observers leaned forward. The small exposure of the envelope, unnoticed by most, had triggered a chain reaction no one could have predicted. The judge's voice faltered. He attempted to restore order, to call attention to decorum, but the words were weak against the weight of history laid bare in Danielle's hands. And then came the first verbal confrontation, a whispered question from a reporter that cut through the tension. "What is that envelope? What's inside?" Silence hung for a heartbeat, then chaos. Whispers cascaded like a flood, opinions forming, speculation rising, tension erupting. Authority was crumbling, not through action, but through revelation. Marcus Greene lunged forward, confident he could seize control, only to realize Danielle had anticipated this. Every movement he made, every demand, every step to assert dominance had been accounted for. The courtroom was no longer his stage, it was hers, and Danielle knew something crucial. Once the first secrets are revealed, the second wave comes faster than anyone expects. The judge, realizing his past decisions, his reputation, and his own family's secrets were now in jeopardy, paled visibly. Authority had a face, and that face now stared back at him, calm, composed, and unshakable. The first plot twist had landed, silent but devastating, and everyone in that room felt the tremor, even if they couldn't yet understand its source. Danielle's calm defiance had turned the courtroom upside down. Power had shifted, control had fractured, and history, long buried, was now in motion. The courtroom had descended into controlled chaos, though no one dared to call it outright. Every eye tracked Danielle Carter, the woman who had upended authority with a single silent act. The envelope, once unnoticed, now sat as a quiet but explosive reminder of what power could never fully contain. Judge Harold Whitman exhaled sharply, attempting to regain his composure. He cleared his throat, steadied his hands, and tried to command the room with the authority he had relied on for decades. "Order! Everyone, please remain seated!" he barked, but the sound of his voice carried a tremor he could not disguise. Danielle's eyes never left his. Calm, poised, unshakable, every flicker of fear, every hesitation, every flick of his hand was noted and catalogued. She had learned long ago that the smallest cracks reveal the deepest truths. Marcus Greene, sensing opportunity, rose from his seat. He attempted to assert control, his voice sharp, full of rehearsed confidence. But Danielle had already anticipated his moves. Every step he took, every demand he made, met silence, patience, or a subtle yet devastating counter. The gallery murmured, sensing the tension rising, though few understood its depth. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching, cameras capturing every subtle movement. The courtroom was alive, not with order, but with suspense, anticipation, and the raw weight of truth pressing down on every person present. The judge's eyes flicked to Danielle again. He could feel the weight of the envelope, the threat it carried, the history it contained. A lifetime of decisions, promises broken, alliances forged and betrayed, all exposed in a simple, folded piece of paper. And yet, Danielle spoke nothing. Her silence was a weapon sharper than any gavel, more potent than any legal argument. She let the judge confront himself, confront his past, confront the consequences he had long ignored. Marcus Greene attempted one final maneuver, a last desperate grasp at control. But it was too late. The power had shifted irrevocably. The judge inhaled slowly, a subtle tremor in his voice as he addressed Danielle directly. "Ms. Carter, you understand what you hold, don't you?" Her calm smile was the only answer. A ripple of whispers passed through the gallery. The tension was almost unbearable. Every officer, every clerk, every spectator felt it. History and truth had collided in that room, and no one would ever see the trial the same way again. The first major reckoning was complete. The first wave had broken over the courthouse, leaving everyone to grasp at fragments of control that no longer existed. And Danielle. She stood quietly, patient, composed, knowing that the storm had only just begun. Because when the truth moves, there is no going back. Marcus Greene's confidence had begun to crack. He had underestimated Danielle Carter. Every calculated move, every rehearsed command, every assumed dominance had been anticipated and dismantled with terrifying precision. He leaned forward, voice rising, hands gesturing, trying to assert the authority he had long relied on. "Everyone, stay calm. This is a courtroom. We follow procedure," he barked, but the tremor in his tone betrayed his panic. Danielle, calm and composed, remained seated. Her eyes, steady and unyielding, met his with a quiet defiance that spoke volumes. No panic, no fear, no hesitation, only patience, only strategy. The judge, clutching the envelope, was caught between his own past and the immediate chaos. He knew Marcus's desperation was dangerous, but he also knew Danielle held the true power now, the power of undeniable truth. Marcus made his move. He strode toward the judge, every step heavy with authority and intention. He reached for the envelope, aiming to regain control, to remove the evidence from Danielle's reach, to restore the hierarchy he had relied on for decades. But Danielle was ready. In a swift, quiet motion, she intercepted, her hand brushing his, sliding the envelope just out of reach. Marcus froze. Shock, disbelief, frustration, all crossing his face in a flash. The gallery gasped. The officers stiffened. The courtroom held its breath. Danielle spoke, calm, measured. "You thought control was yours. You thought fear would silence me. You were wrong." It was a quiet statement, but it carried the weight of every injustice, every betrayal, every unspoken truth. Marcus's smirk faltered. His authority had crumbled completely. He realized, too late, that the courtroom was no longer a stage for his dominance. It had become Danielle's arena, and she held every weapon necessary to dismantle him, not with violence, not with threats, but with truth. The judge, finally regaining a fragment of composure, rose slightly. He understood what Danielle had done, how the first wave of revelation had set the stage for the next. And in that moment, the first major plot twist collided with the second. Danielle wasn't just exposing the judge's past. She was dismantling the entire structure of authority Marcus relied upon. The gallery erupted in murmurs, whispers, and clicks of cameras. The officers exchanged glances, uncertain, powerless. Marcus Greene stood, frozen, as Danielle held the envelope high enough for everyone to see the edge of what it contained. The second twist hit silently, devastatingly. Control was no longer in the hands of those who wielded power daily. Control had passed into the hands of one woman who refused to be silenced. Danielle allowed herself a small, subtle smile. It was not victory, yet. But it was the first undeniable sign that the game had changed, and there was no turning back. If you were watching, could you have anticipated Danielle's move? Could one act of courage truly upend a lifetime of control? Comment below. What would you have done if you were in Marcus Greene's position? And what about Danielle's? And make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the next chapter will reveal the fallout of this confrontation and secrets that will shock the courtroom even further. The envelope had been more than paper and ink. It had been a weapon, a key, and a revelation all at once. Now it was time for the world to see what had been hidden for far too long. Danielle slowly opened the envelope, her hands steady, deliberate. The courtroom fell into a hush so complete that even the faintest breath could be heard. Every eye followed her, every ear strained, every heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the quiet tension she carried. She pulled out the first document. Names, dates, connections, evidence of collusion, betrayal, and decades of secrets no one had dared to expose. The judge's hand trembled. Marcus Greene's jaw tightened. Even the officers, trained to control chaos, felt the weight of what was about to be revealed. Danielle began to speak, voice calm but filled with authority. "These are not just papers. They are history, they are truth, and they show that the justice we trust has been manipulated, abused, and hidden from those it was meant to protect." Whispers erupted. The gallery leaned forward. Reporters scribbled frantically. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Marcus's face turned pale. She laid out document after document, photograph after photograph, letting the room absorb the magnitude of what was in front of them. And then came the second twist, the one no one had anticipated. One of the names on the documents was not just connected to the judge. It implicated Marcus Greene himself in a series of unethical, illegal maneuvers. The courtroom gasped. Shock rippled through the gallery, a wave of disbelief that no one could stop. Marcus's smirk vanished completely. The confidence that had carried him through decades of manipulation and control crumbled in an instant. He tried to speak, tried to command, but Danielle had anticipated it. Every word he would say, every move he would make, had already been accounted for. The judge, pale but resolute, finally addressed the room. This changes everything. We must proceed carefully, but justice will now have its moment." Danielle's eyes scanned the courtroom. The officers, the lawyers, the spectators, all were silent. All were witnesses to a moment of reckoning that would be remembered for years. She had not shouted, she had not threatened, she had not begged for justice. She had revealed the truth. And the truth was unstoppable. History collided with the present. Secrets long buried were laid bare. And Danielle Carter had emerged not just as a witness, but as the force that shifted the balance of power. The courtroom would never be the same. The judge would never preside as he once had. Marcus Greene would never walk with confidence again. And Danielle? She had done what she had come to do. But even as the shockwaves settled, one question lingered in the air, unanswered, unresolved. Who would truly face justice, and who would find a way to escape it? The courtroom had quieted again, but it was a tense, fragile calm. Not the peace of resolution, but the hush that follows a storm, when debris of revelation litters every corner. Danielle Carter remained seated, the envelope now empty but its impact far from gone. The judge sat behind the bench, pale, trembling, wrestling with decisions that could no longer be ignored. Marcus Greene slumped slightly in his chair, defeated but plotting, a man whose arrogance had been shattered, yet whose ambition refused to die. The officers, too, shifted uneasily. Their authority had been pierced, their confidence rattled. Even the gallery seemed suspended in disbelief, caught between awe and fear, curiosity and morality. Danielle's mind raced, as it always did, but her outward composure never faltered. She knew that this was just the beginning. The revelations in the envelope had exposed corruption, manipulation, and betrayal, but they had also ignited questions that could not be answered in a single trial. Who else had been involved? Which decisions, which past actions, were influenced by the same corruption? How far did the network of deceit truly extend, and how many would suffer when it was finally uncovered? She allowed her gaze to sweep the room. The judge, Marcus, the officers, the gallery, every person was now a part of the unfolding narrative. Every reaction, every glance, every subtle gesture would carry weight in the days to come. And then came a subtle shift, a flicker of understanding in the judge's eyes. He realized that Danielle had done more than reveal documents. She had shown him a mirror of his own choices, his own compromises, his own failures, and he couldn't hide from it. Marcus Greene, however, remained defiant. Though he had lost this round, the spark of ambition still burned. He knew the system, he knew the loopholes, he knew the ways to strike back, and he would. Danielle leaned back slightly, almost imperceptibly, and allowed herself a quiet breath. The storm had passed, but the clouds remained heavy. The courtroom was forever altered, yet the echoes of truth would continue to reverberate long after the gavel fell. Outside, reporters whispered, spectators speculated, and the officers regrouped. But Danielle understood the reality. Exposure is only the first step. Justice is never simple, and history, once revealed, has a way of demanding more than anyone is ready to give. And then, in the quietest moment of all, a new message arrived. A small envelope, slid under her door, bearing only a single line. You have made waves, but the depths remain unexplored. Danielle's eyes narrowed. The first storm had passed. The courtroom had been shaken, but the real game, the one that would test every ounce of courage, patience, and cunning, was just beginning. The second twist had rocked the courtroom, but the next one would reach far beyond these walls. The city outside seemed unchanged, but Danielle Carter knew better. The storm she had unleashed in the courtroom was not contained. It had spread, invisible yet undeniable, reaching ears, eyes, and minds she could not see. The small envelope slid under her door, sat on the table in front of her. Its presence was simple, unassuming, but Danielle felt the weight of what it carried. The message inside was brief, cryptic yet chilling. You have made waves, but the depths remain unexplored. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. She knew that power rarely moves in the open. It thrives in shadows, in whispers, in unseen corridors. And if she wanted to survive, and succeed, she would need to confront those shadows directly. Outside her apartment, the city's rhythm continued. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried, streetlights flickered, But Danielle's instincts told her that eyes were watching, and footsteps, unseen, traced the edges of her world. She moved carefully, scanning every corner, every reflection, every sound. The envelope remained unopened for now. Patience was her weapon, strategy her shield. The shadow that had sent it was clever, deliberate, patient, like her. But Danielle Carter had learned long ago that shadows always reveal themselves. Eventually. Hours passed. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number, no message, just a presence, a signal. Her instincts screamed caution, yet curiosity gnawed. She knew that opening the envelope would set the next sequence in motion. It would reveal alliances, betrayals, and dangers far beyond the courtroom. And yet she hesitated, because once a secret is uncovered, there is no way to put it back. The city night pressed against the window. Streetlights cast long, shifting shadows across the room, twisting and bending as though alive. Danielle's mind raced with possibilities. Who had sent the envelope? What depths remained unexplored? Which names, which faces, which forces had remained hidden until now? A soft knock at the door shattered the silence. Danielle froze, every muscle taut. The envelope lay on the table. The unknown visitor waited outside. Every second stretched, each heartbeat louder than the last. She knew, without a doubt, that the next step would change everything again. The second twist had shaken the courtroom. The shadow that had emerged now threatened her entire world, and Danielle Carter, patient, poised, and unflinching, was ready. Because the game had only just begun. The knock at the door echoed in Danielle's apartment, but she didn't move immediately. She watched, patient, letting the tension stretch just long enough to test her instincts, and theirs. A second knock followed, quieter this time, deliberate. Danielle finally approached, eyes scanning the peephole. A man stood outside, middle-aged, neatly dressed, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. He held nothing, yet the air around him felt weighted, charged with unspoken knowledge. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, almost reverently, "I believe we can help each other." Danielle's instincts screamed caution, but curiosity edged in. She knew better than to trust easily, especially now, but something in his tone suggested he held truths she could not yet see. "Who sent the envelope?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. He hesitated, then offered a cryptic answer. Not who, but why, and more importantly, who else knows? Danielle's mind raced. The courtroom had been shaken. Marcus Greene had been cornered, the judge exposed, but the shadow behind the envelope was just the beginning. The battle was not just about truth. It was about survival, influence, and control that extended far beyond the walls of the courthouse. She let him in. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, every shadow more significant. The man introduced himself as Elijah Brooks, a private investigator with connections she hadn't expected, someone who had been tracking Marcus Greene and others like him for years. "Greene has allies," Elijah said, voice low. "People who move quietly, who ensure that the wronged never get their due. He's not acting alone, and the judge, he may have thought he was immune, but even he is part of a larger web." Danielle absorbed the information, calculating, processing. The envelope, the revelations, the courtroom chaos, all pieces of a puzzle far bigger than she had imagined. Elijah continued, "There's a network, Ms. Carter, hidden alliances, unseen power, and people who won't hesitate to eliminate obstacles. You've made waves, but the real storm is coming." Danielle didn't flinch. She had faced injustice, manipulation, and betrayal before. She had learned to navigate storms, and she had never backed down. The first plot twist had shaken authority. The second had exposed greed and corruption. Now the hidden alliances revealed a world operating in the shadows, far beyond what anyone in the courtroom could comprehend. Danielle glanced at the envelope lying on the table. Its contents had been just the beginning. The real revelations, the ones that could change everything, were still ahead. And she knew this. She wouldn't face them alone. Elijah Brooks was a start, but allies and enemies alike could be anywhere, hidden behind layers of deception and loyalty. The stakes had never been higher, and Danielle Carter, calm and composed as ever, was ready to confront them all. Night had fallen over the city, painting skyscrapers in shadows that mirrored Danielle's own thoughts. The envelope, now an emblem of the storm she had unleashed, lay carefully beside her. Every decision she had made, from the courtroom to this very moment, had led her here. Elijah Brooks stood at her side, a silent partner in a world where trust was fragile and danger abundant. He had briefed her on the hidden network, on the allies Marcus Greene had called upon, and on the people who moved unseen, ensuring the powerful stayed untouchable. But tonight, Danielle would confront them all. The meeting place was discreet, a private office, far removed from the public eye. As Danielle stepped inside, the air was tense, charged. Marcus Greene was there, flanked by two shadowy figures whose eyes held the calm menace of people who had never known defeat. The judge was absent, still reeling from exposure, but his influence had lingered, an invisible weight pressing down on the room. Danielle held her ground, calm, composed, unyielding. Her eyes met Marcus's, steady, unflinching, and the first words were hers. "You underestimated me," she said softly, deliberately. "You thought fear and authority could control me. You thought silence would make the truth disappear. But here I am." Marcus sneered, voice dripping with arrogance. "You've made waves, Danielle, but the depths. You've barely scratched the surface. You don't know who you're really up against." Elijah stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Danielle's shoulder. "Stay calm. We've anticipated them. We know their moves. Trust me." Danielle nodded subtly, eyes flicking to the envelope. Inside were documents and evidence that could topple careers, ruin reputations, and expose alliances no one thought could be revealed. This was more than strategy. It was leverage, power distilled into paper and truth. The tension in the room grew unbearable. Every breath, every movement, every glance was charged. And then, the first strike, the true confrontation began. Danielle revealed the envelope, letting the documents fall into clear view. The shadowy figures flinched. Marcus Greene's jaw tightened. The room, silent for seconds, erupted in controlled chaos as reality sank in. The first twist of the final confrontation, one of Marcus's allies, a trusted figure in the network, betrayed him, stepping toward Danielle with quiet resolve. She had anticipated this, an inside ally willing to risk everything, and it shifted the balance instantly. The second twist, the ultimate revelation, was in the judge's absence. A hidden recording, long forgotten, surfaced in Danielle's hands, revealing conversations and collusion that implicated the highest authorities in the city's justice system. The scale of deception, greed, and manipulation was now undeniable, and Danielle held it all. Marcus Greene faltered, his confident veneer cracking completely. The network, once untouchable, now trembled under the weight of exposure. And Danielle Carter, calm, poised, and unflinching, finally stood at the peak of the storm she had created. But even as victory seemed near, Danielle knew better. True justice is never simple, and even exposure carries danger. The shadows had moved, allies had revealed themselves, enemies had faltered. But one question remained unanswered. Who, in the end, would pay the price, and who would find a way to escape the consequences of their actions? If you were Danielle, would you reveal everything, or use the evidence to negotiate your own safety? Who do you think deserves justice the most, and who might still slip through the cracks? Comment below, how would you handle this final confrontation, and what would you do next if you held all the power in the room? And make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the final chapter will tie the story together, but the last cliffhanger will leave you questioning everything.